Have you ever found yourself carrying a weight no one else seems to notice? The kind of burden that builds quietly over the years, one selfless choice at a time, until one day you wonder if you simply become invisible to the people you love most. My name is Clara Bennett, and for most of my life, I believed being a good daughter meant sacrificing my own dreams, my energy, even my voice for the sake of my family. I wore my reliability like armor, never letting it slip, hoping that if I just gave enough, I would finally belong. But sometimes the ones who hold everyone else together are the ones who go unseen. My mother, Linda, used to say family means everything. For years, I clung to those words, even as the definition of family began to twist and blur inside our small Chicago apartment. My younger brother, Evan, was always the center of her universe, charming, unpredictable. His needs, urgent and immediate. I was the steady background, the fixer, the quiet anchor. I told myself it was enough just to be needed. But is it? Tonight, I want to share a story that may sound painfully familiar to you or to someone you love. A story of duty and devotion, of guilt and expectation, of slowly realizing that love and loyalty can sometimes hurt more than they heal. It's a journey from silence to self-respect, from heartbreak to hope. Along the way, I'll share with you the hardest lessons I learned, the mistakes I made, and the quiet victories that helped me find my voice again. Wherever you're watching from, whether it's the heart of a bustling city or the quiet comfort of your own room, I invite you to pause for a moment and reflect. What does family mean to you? Have you ever felt lost in the very place that should have felt like home? As you listen, I hope you find echoes of your own strength in my story, and maybe the courage to choose yourself just once. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And let's build a community of stories, of shared struggles and new beginnings. Because sometimes the first step toward healing is realizing you're not alone. Now let's begin. From the outside, the Bennett family looked like any other hardworking middle-class family, tucked into a quiet suburb just outside Chicago. Our home was a modest 2-story house, faded blue with white trim, always tidy, always welcoming. Neighbors often waved as they passed, commenting on my mother's perfectly pruned roses or my brother Evan's latest basketball trophy displayed in the front window. If you asked anyone, they'd say we were close a family that stuck together, who never seemed to falter. But what they didn't see was how easily the glue that holds a family together can become invisible, how someone's steady hands can go unnoticed until they're empty. My father, Thomas Bennett, passed away when I was only 16, leaving behind a hollow quiet that echoed through our house. I remember standing at his funeral, clutching my brother's hand, feeling 1,000 responsibilities settle onto my shoulders all at once. My mother, Linda, was devastated but determined to carry on. She often told me, "Clara, you're my rock now." Those words became both my comfort and my cage. I took them to heart in a way only a daughter desperate for her mother's approval could. I started doing extra chores, keeping my grades up, making sure Evan ate breakfast, helping him with homework, and even walking him to school when he was nervous. Every time I did, my mother would squeeze my hand and say, "What would I do without you?" It felt like love at first. But being the rock meant learning to put everyone else's needs ahead of my own. I remember my senior year of high school when I was accepted into a summer science camp at Northwestern University. It was a dream opportunity, something I had worked for all year. When the acceptance letter came, I danced around my room breathless with excitement. But that night at dinner, my mother's face fell when I shared the news. "But who will help me with Evan if you're gone all summer?" she asked softly. Evan, only 10 at the time, looked up at me with wide eyes. I could feel the weight of their needs, the unspoken expectation that I would choose family over myself. In the end, I did. I wrote a polite email declining the camp, and my mother hugged me tighter than ever, whispering, "You're such a good daughter." For years, I wore that sacrifice, like a badge of honor, never telling anyone how much it hurt. As I grew older, those sacrifices multiplied. When I started college, I commuted from home to save money and to help my mother with the house and Evan's schoolwork. My friends went away, joined clubs, found new freedoms, while I hurried home each day to cook dinner and tutor Evan for his algebra tests. The few times I tried to talk about my own dreams, a semester abroad, a part-time job at a downtown startup, my mother would gently remind me of my responsibilities. Sometimes it was Evan himself who'd plead, "Don't leave us, Clara. I need you." And so, again and again, I put my own life on hold. I told myself it was temporary, that someday it would be my turn. But the truth is, I'd started to believe maybe this was all I was meant for, the fixer, the peacemaker, the anchor no one saw. Looking back, I realize how many women, sisters, daughters, mothers, fall into the same silent pattern, believing that love is measured by how much you give up for others. In American families, especially those touched by loss or hardship, the eldest daughter often becomes the second parent, expected to be strong, reliable, uncomplaining. It's a quiet epidemic, one that's rarely talked about. We celebrate the star athletes, the ambitious sons, the parents who hold it all together, but we rarely see the girls who quietly patch every crack, whose dreams are traded for stability, whose voices fade into the background noise of family life. I see this story reflected in so many of my friends, like my college roommate Rachel, who gave up a medical school scholarship to raise her younger siblings after her parents' divorce. We rarely talk about it, but the pain and pride live just beneath the surface. The lesson I wish I'd known back then is simple, but hard to live. Your worth is not defined by how much you give up for others. Love is not a currency you earn by denying yourself. Sometimes being the glue that holds others together means you start to disappear piece by piece. And while sacrifice can be an act of love, it should never come at the cost of losing who you are. As I look back on those early years, I see now that the story I was living wasn't just my own, it was part of a larger, quieter tradition. But every story has a turning point, and mine began the day I realized that being someone's anchor doesn't mean you have to sink. In the next part, I'll share how my sacrifices shaped not only my future, but the expectations and habits that would follow me for years, until one night everything changed. Responsibility is a word that looks simple on the page, but it can fill a lifetime in unexpected ways. For me, it became a second skin, one that felt both comforting and constricting. As Evan moved into his teenage years and my mother's worries multiplied, my role as the family anchor only deepened. I graduated from college with honors, but instead of celebrating with friends, I found myself driving Evan to his first summer job interview, helping him rehearse answers while mentally calculating which bills were due next. The weight of doing the right thing had settled so naturally on my shoulders that I barely noticed its heaviness anymore. I remember one autumn when Evan was a freshman in college and struggling with his grades. My mother, still working long shifts at the pharmacy, called me almost every evening. "Clara, I just don't know what to do with your brother. He listens to you. Can you help?" So I did. I edited his essays, coached him through late-night panic over math exams, even drove an hour each way on weekends to bring him home-cooked meals when he said dining hall food made him sick. At the time, it felt like an act of love. I wanted him to succeed, wanted to believe that with my help, he would find his footing. But as the months turned into years, my own life quietly shrank. Friends' invitations faded, my dreams traveled further, studies, even just lazy Saturday mornings, became distant memories. It wasn't only my mother and brother who expected me to be there for everything. Over time, I expected it of myself. I began turning down opportunities before anyone even asked. When my manager at work suggested I apply for a prestigious out-of-state project, I immediately declined, thinking, who would handle things at home if I left? I convinced myself that being present for my family was more important than any career milestone. That's how this kind of self-erasure works. Little by little, you make yourself smaller until your own voice is little more than a whisper in the back of your mind. And when people praise my reliability, Clara can always be counted on. It only reinforced the pattern. I was proud, but also quietly grieving a version of myself I'd barely gotten to know. This invisible burden isn't just my story. Across America, I've met women who share similar tales: eldest daughters, single mothers, grandmothers, raising grandchildren, sisters, stepping up when no one else will. My college friend Maya worked 2 jobs to support her siblings after their parents' business failed. My neighbor Mrs. Alvarez took care of her aging parents for a decade, giving up her chance to open a bakery. We rarely talk about these sacrifices, but they run through so many families like a silent current. Cultural expectations, especially for women, often frame selflessness as a virtue. But sometimes it can become a trap. The lesson I gradually learned is that there's a difference between being helpful and becoming invisible. True support lifts everyone, but if it only drains you, it's time to pause and ask what you're losing. I wish someone had told me that boundaries are not a betrayal, they're an act of self-respect, and that you can love your family deeply without setting yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. If you're listening and seeing your own story in mine, I hope you know it's not selfish to dream, to rest, or to want something for yourself. Those are not luxuries, they're necessities. Looking back, I realize how easy it is to confuse being needed with being valued. For years, I thought my place in the family depended on my sacrifices. But slowly, quietly, a new longing began to grow inside me, a desire for something more than duty, more than quiet endurance. It was the faintest whisper, but it was there, a hope for a life where my needs, my dreams, and my happiness mattered too. That whisper would become a lifeline when everything finally unraveled. In the next part of my story, I'll share how my brother's ambitions and my mother's expectations led to the night everything changed, and how for the first time, I was forced to decide whose life I was really living. The idea of a fresh start can be intoxicating, especially for someone who has always been told, "You can do anything." My brother Evan, with his easy charm and restless energy, always seemed to chase after the next big thing. One spring, he announced he was going to become a lifestyle influencer. He had a grand vision, a launch party that would kickstart his online persona and draw all the right eyes. He shared his plan at a family dinner, his eyes alight with excitement. Mom clapped her hands and declared, "This is your moment, Evan." She glanced at me as if expecting an immediate offer of support. It was a script we'd played before. I tried to smile, but inside I felt the familiar knot of responsibility twisting tighter. Within days, I received a call from Mom. "Evan needs a little help getting this off the ground," she said. "It'll mean so much to him and to me." She sounded so certain, so sure I would say yes that I almost wondered if I really had a choice. Over the next weeks, I helped cover deposits for his party venue, paid the photographer's fee, and even chipped in for the catered food. Each check was written with a mix of pride, hope, and quiet resignation. I told myself, maybe this time things will be different. Maybe this will give Evan the confidence to stand on his own, but I also noticed how easily my support was taken for granted. Evan's thank yous faded, quickly replaced by new requests, new expectations. When I hesitated, Mom would remind me, "We have to help each other. It's what family does." This cycle, I realized, wasn't unique to us. I remembered my coworker Susan sharing how her older daughter always stepped in to bail out her younger son first with a college loan, then with rent, then with medical bills. The pattern was everywhere. One sibling becomes the fixer, the other never quite learns to stand alone. Sometimes this dynamic is born out of love, but more often it's habit reinforced by gratitude that feels more like obligation and a hope that things will finally change. In truth, what we're often doing is postponing the hard work of letting people grow up, of letting them face their own consequences and earn their own victories. I saw it in my family and in so many others around me. It's so easy to believe you're helping when really you're holding everyone in place. What took me a long time to understand is that supporting someone doesn't mean saving them from every fall. If we're always there to cushion the blow, they never learn how to get up on their own. That's a hard lesson, especially for those of us who define our worth by how much we can do for others. I started to realize that my sacrifices weren't leading to more appreciation or stronger family bonds. Instead, they were building resentment quietly inside me, and perhaps even in Evan, who never quite felt the pride of real achievement. True support, I learned, isn't about constant rescue. It's about trusting others enough to let them stumble, learn, and find their own strength. The hardest part is knowing when to step back. The weeks leading up to Evan's party were a blur. My own dreams faded into the background as family needs swallowed up my time and resources. On the night of the launch, as guests toasted Evan's new journey and music filled the rented hall, I stood quietly by the door, both proud and deeply tired. I wanted desperately to believe that all the giving would someday be enough that it would build a bridge to real belonging. But as the lights dimmed and the party wound down, I sensed something shifting inside me. The first gentle questioning of a role I'd accepted for so long. Was I helping or simply disappearing? This question lingered in my heart as the party ended, and it would soon take on new urgency. Because sometimes it's not the big events that change your life, but the slow realization that something has to give. In the next part, I'll share how a single night one I never could have predicted forced me to see my family and myself in a way I never had before. Sometimes you don't realize how thin you've been stretched until everything finally snaps. The weeks after Evan's launch party were a blur of work deadlines, family requests, and bone-deep exhaustion. I found myself running on caffeine and willpower, trying to be everywhere and everything for everyone. Each morning I promised myself a break, but every evening brought a new crisis. Evan needed help with his first sponsored post. Mom's car wouldn't start, bills kept piling up. Even my friends started to notice I was withdrawing, too tired for even a quick coffee catch-up. I told myself it was just a rough patch, but inside a small voice whispered, "Something has to change." That change arrived unexpectedly on a rain-soaked Thursday night. I had just wired more money to my mother this time for emergency repairs to the house and stayed late at the office to meet a project deadline. By the time I got in my car, the city was wrapped in darkness and shimmering wet streets. I remember gripping the steering wheel, my mind crowded with worries. Had I forgotten anything? Would Mom be okay? Had I failed Evan by missing his call? Suddenly, bright headlights flared in my lane. A blare of horn, the sickening slide of tires on water, and then nothing. Silence, darkness, the world receding. The next thing I remember was the antiseptic scent of a hospital room and the steady, unfamiliar beeping of machines. Waking up in the ICU felt like surfacing from a deep, cold lake. My body ached in places I didn't know could hurt. My head throbbed, and I could barely move. Through the haze, a nurse's gentle voice reached me. "Clara, you're safe now. You're in the hospital." When the doctor came, his face was serious as he explained the extent of my injuries and that the next 24 hours would be critical. "Is your family here?" he asked. I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. He said they'd tried calling but hadn't been able to reach anyone. In that moment, I felt both vulnerable and invisible, floating in a space where time slowed, and every breath was uncertain. The people I had always prioritized, would they come? Would they even notice I was gone if nobody called them first? As the hours crept by, the answer became painfully clear. The nurse, kind and attentive, checked in with me through the long night, offering comfort that my own family did not. When they finally reached my mother, I heard her voice through the speaker, bright with music and laughter in the background. "Tonight's just impossible." "Clara's brother has his big party," she explained to the nurse, apologizing for her absence. I listened, silent tears slipping down my cheeks as the woman who had always called me her rock now chose a party over my hospital bed. Evan, too, was busy with his guests, his new image, his future. I realized in the harsh fluorescent light of that room that sometimes the people you hold up the most are the quickest to let go when you fall. It's a hard lesson, but a vital one. Those who show up when you have nothing left to give are your true family. It might be a nurse, a friend, or even a stranger, someone who offers a gentle hand or a few kind words. In those quiet, lonely hours, I understood for the first time that love isn't just about what you give. It's about who stays when you have nothing left. This realization was both heartbreaking and strangely liberating. For years, I'd confused obligation with affection, but here, stripped of all my roles and responsibilities, I saw the truth. The people who rush in when you're at your weakest reveal what your relationships are really made of. The dawn brought a new clarity and a choice. For the first time, I began to question what it would mean to start putting myself first. How would my life look if I stopped measuring my worth by what I did for others and instead asked what I needed to heal? The answer would shape everything that came next. In the following part, I'll share how, with the help of an unexpected ally, I began to redefine my place in the world, and how the act of writing a single letter changed the course of my life forever. The morning after my night in the ICU dawned gray and quiet, but inside me something had shifted irrevocably. I lay in that hospital bed, a tangle of wires and bandages, feeling both fragile and strangely strong. For the first time, the urge to survive wasn't about returning to the life I'd always known. It was about forging something entirely new. I realized that my story could go on exactly as before, with me stepping right back into the same familiar cycle of giving until there was nothing left. Or I could choose something different. I could choose myself. That day, I asked my nurse, a compassionate woman named Sonia, to help me find my phone and a pen. My hands shook as I dialed the only person I knew would understand, my friend Ashley. She arrived at my bedside within the hour, her presence a balm in the sterile hospital room. We talked quietly about what had happened, but even more about what I wanted for my future. "You don't have to keep carrying them," Ashley told me softly. "You get to decide where your energy goes from now on." Those words felt like sunlight in a winter room. With Ashley's help, I called a lawyer, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Jackson, who walked me through the first steps of disentangling my finances from my family's endless needs. It wasn't easy. Writing the letter that would sever my role as the family's fixer was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I sat propped up in my hospital bed, pen pressed tight between my fingers, and poured out years of silent heartache. I explained why I could no longer be the person who held everyone together, why I was taking back control of my money, my boundaries, and my life. I listed not out of spite, but out of clarity, the ways I had been asked to give, even as my own needs were ignored. Most of all, I told them, this is not a punishment. It's a rescue mission for myself. I signed the letter with trembling hands, but when I finished, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sometimes courage is just putting into words what your heart has known all along. There are so many people who never reach this point, who keep waiting for the right time to speak up, who fear the loneliness that can follow choosing yourself. I know because I almost stayed silent too. But in that quiet room, I finally understood that loving someone does not mean abandoning yourself. I remembered stories Ashley had shared of others who'd made similar choices. The cousin who left a toxic marriage, the coworker who finally stopped rescuing her grown children. Each time the first step was terrifying, but each time it was the start of real healing. The pain of letting go was sharp, but it was also the only way to make room for something new to grow. The lesson I learned in those early days of recovery was simple, though it didn't feel simple at the time. Self-respect is not selfishness. It is the beginning of every healthy boundary, every new dream, every genuine act of love. If you never choose yourself, you're asking others to do what you won't, and that rarely leads to real happiness for you or for them. My letter wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of hope, a blueprint for a future in which I could finally breathe. As the days passed and I grew stronger, Ashley and Ms. Jackson helped me put new safeguards in place. Legal paperwork, new accounts, the gentle but firm return of borrowed keys. I felt fear and guilt, of course, but also a growing pride that I was making choices for myself at last. And with every step, I realized the act of setting yourself free is a gift not only to you, but to everyone around you. Sometimes it takes the hardest night of your life to wake up to a different kind of morning. What came next wasn't always easy: recovery, loneliness, the awkwardness of learning new boundaries. In the next part, I'll share what it was really like to unlearn years of old patterns and begin building a life that was finally my own. Change doesn't come in a single sweeping moment. For me, it arrived in tiny, uncertain steps, each one both liberating and frightening. After leaving the hospital, I moved into a small apartment at the edge of the city. The space was modest, but blessedly quiet, with sunlight spilling through gauzy curtains in the morning. My new home felt like a blank page, but it also felt lonely. There were days when I woke with a surge of hope, and other days when the silence felt as heavy as a winter coat. I had always thought that freedom would feel like joy, but I quickly learned that unlearning a lifetime of self-sacrifice takes patience and courage. At first, I struggled to establish boundaries not just with my family, but with myself. I had spent years automatically saying yes to every request, so it felt unnatural to pause to consider my own needs before answering. I remember the first time my mother called, her voice carefully neutral, as she asked for help with Evan's finances again. My heart pounded, and I almost agreed out of habit, but I took a breath and said, "I can't help with that right now, Mom." The silence on the other end was uncomfortable, but afterward I felt a quiet surge of pride. Setting boundaries didn't mean I loved my family less. It simply meant I was beginning to love myself too. Therapy became my anchor in this new chapter. My counselor, Dr. Simmons, helped me understand why it felt so hard to put myself first. She explained the patterns that often form in families where one member is the caretaker, how guilt, fear, and a desire for acceptance can keep us stuck in old roles long after they stop serving us. Dr. Simmons encouraged me to notice small victories, saying no without guilt, taking a day for myself without explanation, even just naming my feelings honestly. I started keeping a journal, jotting down the moments when I resisted the urge to fix someone else's problems, or when I chose rest over endless obligation. Each tiny act felt like a stone in the foundation of a new life. As I slowly rebuilt my days, I realized how much I had missed out on. I started attending a local art class, something I'd always wanted to do, but never made time for. At first, I was awkward, my brushstrokes uncertain, but the gentle encouragement of my instructor and classmates made all the difference. I even met a woman named Joy who became my first true friend in years. We shared coffee after class, swapped stories about our families, and supported each other through setbacks. For the first time, I felt what it meant to be chosen not out of duty, but out of genuine connection. Looking back, I see that unlearning old patterns is a process, not an event. There were nights when I doubted myself, when loneliness pressed in, and I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But those moments were balanced by new experiences, moments of quiet pride and the realization that I was finally living on my own terms. The lesson I learned is that boundaries are not walls. They're doors that you open for the right people and close gently for those who cannot respect your space. Healing starts with permission to rest, to say no, to want more. As spring turned to summer, my world grew a little bigger each day. I was still learning, still stumbling at times, but I was no longer living just to meet someone else's needs. In the next part of my story, I'll share how my decision to step away brought unexpected consequences for my family, and how letting go finally forced everyone, not just me, to face reality. When you change, the people around you are forced to change too, sometimes in ways no one expects. As I settled into my new life, the ripples of my absence grew into waves for my family. Without my steady stream of support, my mother and Evan faced challenges they had long managed to avoid. At first, the calls and texts came, often small requests, then urgent pleas, sometimes even sharp words laced with old guilt. "You're just abandoning us," Mom said in one message, her disappointment palpable. What happened to family coming first? There was a time when those words would have shattered me. But now, with every boundary I held, I realized that love is not proven by letting yourself drown. Evan's influencer venture, which had looked so glamorous from a distance, quickly began to crumble without the quiet cushion of my financial help. Bills went unpaid. His social media image, the curated world of rented cars and expensive dinners, was revealed to be a facade. Without my invisible support, he faced overdue notices, calls from creditors, and friends who disappeared when the money ran out. I heard through the grapevine that he blamed everyone but himself, me most of all, for his troubles. "She just walked away," he complained to a mutual friend. But the truth was, for the first time, Evan had to stand on his own 2 feet. My absence, though painful for all of us, was the beginning of his reckoning with reality. My mother, meanwhile, struggled to keep up with the mounting household expenses. The small emergencies I'd always handled, car repairs, leaky pipes, overdue utilities, quickly became overwhelming. I learned later that she took out a second mortgage, believing perhaps that I would swoop in at the last minute to save her. But I didn't. For the first time in decades, she had to navigate job applications and uncomfortable interviews. Her pride was wounded, her anger simmering. Our extended family, once silent, began to ask questions. My aunt quietly told me, "Sometimes it takes a storm for people to realize where they really stand." That storm was now at my family's door. The hard truth is that enabling someone, no matter how well-intentioned, rarely helps them grow. By always stepping in, I'd allowed my mother and brother to avoid the consequences of their choices. Letting go wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of faith in their ability to figure things out, to learn resilience. I remembered something Dr. Simmons, my therapist, had said: "People are more resourceful than we think." Sometimes the greatest gift is letting them face life as it is. The lesson was bittersweet but essential. You cannot control someone else's growth by sacrificing your own. Even as my family struggled, I had moments of doubt, late-night worries that maybe I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. But with each day that passed, I could see the changes taking root. My mother learned to ask for help in new ways, to rely on others, and to make hard choices. Evan began picking up freelance work, learning slowly what it meant to earn and lose, to try and fail on his own terms. Our family didn't fall apart. It simply changed shape, the way a tree bends in a storm but still stands when the winds quiet down. The hardest part of letting go isn't the silence or the distance, it's trusting that the people you love can survive without you. And maybe, just maybe, so can you. As my family faced their own reckoning, I found space to build something new. In the next part, I'll share how I began to fill my life with chosen connections and what it felt like to finally experience support and belonging, not because I was needed, but because I was seen and valued for who I truly am. As the noise of my old life faded, a new kind of quiet began to take root, one that wasn't empty but gently inviting. At first, it felt awkward to fill my days with things that were just for me. The routines I once followed out of obligation were replaced by choices that felt both foreign and exhilarating. Some mornings, I simply made coffee and sat in the sunshine, letting myself breathe without a list of things to fix. It was a strange and beautiful kind of freedom, like learning to walk all over again. One of the first real steps I took was signing up for an art class at the local community center. My hands shook as I stood at the doorway that first evening, uncertain if I belonged there. But inside, the room hummed with laughter and the quiet focus of people intent on creating something from nothing. Over the weeks, I found myself painting beside retirees, students, and busy parents, all of us united by the gentle vulnerability of trying something new. There I met Joy, a woman with a bright laugh and a gentle heart. She became a friend in the way I'd forgotten was possible, someone who asked how I was, who listened without expectation, and who celebrated my small victories. It wasn't just Joy. Slowly, I allowed other connections to grow. A neighbor, Mrs. Evans, would leave homemade bread at my door with a handwritten note. My art teacher, Mr. Lamb, encouraged me to show my work in a local cafe. Even Ashley, my longtime friend, became more than a confidant. She was now a partner in joy, not just a witness to pain. These relationships didn't demand sacrifice. They offered kindness, understanding, and acceptance. I started to realize that family isn't always the one you're born into. It's the people who show up, who see you, and who gently invite you to see yourself. This shift brought unexpected healing. There were still hard days, moments when memories of my old life pricked at my heart, or when loneliness threatened to close in. But now I had anchors, coffee dates, art sessions, spontaneous walks by the lake that tethered me to the present. I began to trust again, not because I needed to be needed, but because I deserved to be known. I listened to other people's stories and shared my own in return, discovering that my struggles weren't unique. In opening up, I found community solidarity and the kind of support that grows from choice, not obligation. The lesson that bloomed in those quiet moments was simple but profound. Real belonging is built on mutual respect and care, not on sacrifice or guilt. We all deserve relationships where our needs and joys matter as much as anyone else's. Building a chosen family takes time and courage, especially if you're used to shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. But every small step, every honest conversation, every boundary kept, every laugh shared, helped me reclaim a sense of self that was never meant to be lost. As autumn arrived and the leaves turned gold, I realized that life could be both softer and stronger than I ever imagined. I didn't have to carry the world to be loved. I didn't have to prove my worth with exhaustion. What mattered was showing up for myself and letting others do the same for me. In the next part of my story, I'll explore what it meant to truly begin healing, not by erasing the past, but by learning to forgive, to grow, and to embrace a future where I am both free and whole. Healing, I soon learned, is rarely a straight line. Even with new friends and a fresh sense of purpose, the echoes of old wounds could still find me in the quietest moments. Sometimes all it took was a familiar song, a photo, or the sight of a mother and daughter laughing in a cafe to stir up memories of what I'd lost and what I'd never really had. At night, my mind sometimes wandered back to the hospital, to the sound of my mother's voice making excuses from afar, to the dull ache of wanting her comfort and knowing it would never come in the way I needed. It was in these tender, vulnerable moments that I realized forgiveness was a gift I had to give myself first. At the encouragement of Dr. Simmons, my therapist, I started writing letters, not to send, but to unburden my heart. I wrote to my mother, pouring out not just anger, but all the hope and longing I had carried for so long. I wrote to Evan, telling him about the little sister I had wanted to be and the sister I became instead. And most importantly, I wrote to myself. You did your best, I penned late one evening. You deserve peace. You deserve love just as you are. With each letter, I let go of another layer of guilt and regret, discovering a gentleness toward myself I had never allowed before. Forgiveness, I found, isn't about pretending the past didn't hurt. It's not a grand gesture or a single moment of closure. Sometimes it's just waking up and deciding not to let bitterness shape your day. There were weeks when I felt I was making no progress at all, when old doubts crept in and my boundaries faltered. But every time I showed myself kindness, choosing a quiet afternoon over a frantic favor, accepting support from a friend, or simply breathing through the sadness, I was slowly building a future not defined by pain. Healing was learning to sit with discomfort, to acknowledge every part of my story, and to trust that I could carry it all and still move forward. One afternoon, I met Joy for coffee by the lake. As we talked about art, family, and the surprising directions life can take, I realized how much lighter my heart felt. I told her about the letters, about the pain and the progress, and she squeezed my hand and said, "You're not alone in this. Everyone carries something, but not everyone is brave enough to let it go." Her words reminded me that forgiveness is not a finish line, but a practice, one that can be renewed as often as needed. It isn't about letting others off the hook, but about setting yourself free. The lesson I carry now is this: healing is not about erasing your story, but about finding the courage to live it fully, scars and all. We all have chapters we wish had turned out differently, but it's what we do with those pages that matters. I discovered that my past didn't have to dictate my future. With every day that I chose hope over hurt, I reclaimed another piece of myself. As winter approached and the days grew shorter, I realized I was no longer just surviving. I was growing, forgiving, and loving myself into a new season. In the final part of my story, I'll share what it means to redefine family, to find meaning in second chances, and to offer hope for anyone still searching for a place to truly belong. Redefining family isn't about erasing the past. It's about understanding that belonging can take many shapes, and that sometimes the people we choose are just as important as those we're born to. As another year began, I found myself looking around my small kitchen table where new friends gathered for simple meals, laughter echoing in the cozy apartment I now called home. Joy brought homemade brownies. Ashley arrived with stories from her latest hiking trip. Even Mr. Lamb from art class dropped by, arms full of fresh flowers for the windowsill. These gatherings were not extravagant, but they were filled with warmth, and I realized that I felt more at home here than I ever had in the house where I'd grown up. Life had become a patchwork of little victories and second chances. I had started mentoring at a local community center, guiding young women who were learning to navigate complicated family expectations and the pull between duty and self-worth. Each time I listened to their stories, some heartbreaking, some hopeful, I remembered how lost I'd once felt and how healing began when someone simply heard me without judgment. I saw reflections of my old self in these young women, and I did my best to offer them the support I'd always craved. Not answers, but acceptance and encouragement. The biggest lesson I've learned on this journey is that you are allowed to outgrow old roles and rewrite your story. There will always be people who don't understand your choices, who wish for the version of you that gave without question. That's okay. Boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They're invitations to relate in healthier ways for both sides. I'm not the fixer anymore, not the background hero or the silent helper. I'm Clara in perfect independence, still learning every day, but finally free to define happiness on my own terms. Forgiveness and healing are not destinations, but practices. Some days the old ache of longing for family surfaces, and I let myself feel it without shame. Other days, I marvel at the small joys I'd once overlooked: a sunrise on a chilly morning, the quiet confidence of standing up for myself at work, a friend's hand reaching for mine in a crowded room. I no longer measure my worth by what I give up for others. I measure it by how authentically I can show up both for myself and the people who truly care. As I sit here sharing my story with you, I hope you know you're not alone, no matter where you are in your own journey. Family can be chosen, home can be created, and healing is always possible even when it feels far away. If you're standing at a crossroads wondering if you're allowed to put yourself first, I hope my story gives you courage to take the next step. Ask for help. Set the boundary. Allow yourself to hope for more. Thank you for walking with me through all these chapters, through heartbreak and hope, through silence and song. If this story has resonated with you, I invite you to share your own experiences in the comments below. Where have you found your chosen family? What boundaries have helped you reclaim your life? Let's continue building a community where honesty and compassion are our common ground. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves and each other is the freedom to begin again. If my story touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever chosen yourself even when it felt impossible? Have you built a chosen family or learned to set boundaries that changed your life? Please share your experiences or reflections in the comments below. Your voice could be the encouragement someone else needs today. If you found hope or comfort here, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing this video with someone who might need it. Let's grow this community of empathy and support together. And remember, you are not alone. Every new beginning starts with a single brave step. Thank you for being here. Take gentle care of yourself because you are worthy just as you are.